Welcome, you architects of your own destiny. The greatest acts of liberation aren't born of fleeting whims. They are meticulously crafted symphonies composed in the quiet hours long before the world suspects a shift. Did you know that within the clandestine world of real-life prison breaks, the average escape plan simmers for over 250 days before the inaugural move is made? Every clandestine tunnel excavated, every tool discreetly concealed, every guard's intricate routine committed to memory, all executed under a veil of unsuspecting normalcy. Now supplant those prison bars with the shackles of their control over you and replace those vigilant guards with their relentless manipulations. This precisely is what you have orchestrated. You weren't merely departing, you were curating a masterpiece of emancipation. Your exit was not a haphazard event, it was a calculated operation. And as they remained mired in their underestimation of you, you were silently sketching blueprints within the theater of your mind, an architect of freedom designing a sanctuary from their influence. Incrementally, you dismantled the bridge connecting you to them, ensuring not a single plank emitted a telltale creak. They deluded themselves into believing they could ensnare you should you attempt to flee. Yet you transcended their expectations. You didn't merely slip through the net. You left them questioning whether the net ever existed in the first place. Their confidence in your perpetual presence was so absolute that they failed to perceive you were already halfway through the threshold, your metaphorical Oscar for Best Disappearing Act, already etched with your triumph. And here's the unexpected twist. Your departure wasn't marked by tumultuous chaos. There were no dramatic outbursts, no forceful door slams. You navigated your exit with such impeccable precision and refined style that even MI6 would be compelled to take notes. Indeed, if James Bond possessed your level of meticulous planning, his cinematic adventures would be notably abbreviated. What I am about to unveil for you is the precise methodology by which the chosen one orchestrates an escape so seamless, so impervious, that by the time your absence registers, you've already cultivated a vibrant new existence beyond their reach. Firstly, you didn't merely leave. You strategically erased yourself from their map of dominion. You didn't simply sever ties, you expunged yourself from the very cartography they employed to exert control. People often perceive leaving as a straightforward act of packing, blocking numbers, or severing connections. However, when subjected to prolonged influence, they extend their reach beyond mere location tracking. They monitor your habits, exploit your vulnerabilities, and anticipate your reactions. They discern when you are angered, fatigued, or susceptible, leveraging these insights to reel you back. Knowing that a reckless departure would merely lead them to your next chapter, where they would attempt to extinguish it before it could take root, you conceived an alternative strategy. Your exit was not a single dramatic sweep. Instead, you gradually faded from their awareness, blurring the lines of your whereabouts and activities. You rendered your existence illegible, minimizing the information they possessed regarding your schedule, emotions, and affiliations, until their mental image of you became obsolete and inconsequential. By the time they registered your diminished accessibility, they were devoid of any starting point for a search. The brilliance lies in your ability to transform their overconfidence into your protective cloak. Their suspicion remained dormant because you provided no extraordinary triggers for alarm. You played your part just sufficiently to maintain their complacency, all while discreetly severing connections, modifying routines, and securing doors they were oblivious to. This disappearance was not an overnight occurrence. It was a deliberate, gradual dismantling of their access to you. Its potency stemmed from the fact that your absence transcended the physical realm. You became mentally and emotionally detached long before your physical departure. You ceased providing them with details they could weaponize. You abandoned the practice of self-justification. You ceased reacting in predictable ways. Without any formal announcement, their grasp began to loosen unnoticed. By the time the physical exit materialized, they were left with a void of unanswered inquiries and dead ends. This is the reason for their current obsession. They are unable to stalk what they cannot perceive. They are unable to manipulate what they cannot reach. They are unable to confront what they cannot locate. You did not merely withdraw from them. You vanished from the world in which they believed they possessed you. And you executed this feat so flawlessly that they remain unable to pinpoint the precise moment, location, or method of its execution. Secondly, you starved the parasitic connection before severing the cord. You recognize that individuals of their ilk do not readily relinquish control. An abrupt severance would have triggered an overwhelming response, incessant calls, manipulative guilt trips, the dissemination of falsehoods, the mobilization of others against you, all aimed at either coercing your return or punishing you for your desertion. Thus, you adopted a divergent strategy. You starved the parasite before severing the cord. You ceased fueling their ego as you once had. You refrained from presenting your emotions on the silver platter for their dissection. You denied them the gratification of knowing they could still provoke you. Gradually, you diminished your utility to them. The process initiated subtly. You ceased prioritizing their calls. You refrained from divulging every detail of your existence. You offered abbreviated responses, diminished enthusiasm, and lessened energy. You consciously resisted reacting when they deployed their customary tactics. You understood that responding with silence or composure where they anticipated outrage or tears would weaken their grip. Over time, the emotional sustenance they derived from you began to wane, and because individuals of this nature thrive on a continuous influx of attention, drama, and validation, you were effectively cutting off their oxygen supply unbeknownst to them. This was not an act of vengeance, it was a tactical maneuver. Your objective was to induce a state in which your absence would not trigger the retaliatory measures that could jeopardize you. By gradually restricting their access, you softened the impact of the separation on their system. By the time you departed permanently, they had already been living without the most valuable aspects of you for a considerable period. And without those elements, their influence over you diminished with each passing day. The brilliance of your strategy lies in their perception of you as merely changed or preoccupied, perhaps even undergoing a transient phase. They failed to comprehend that you were intentionally disconnecting the conduits one at a time, They did not realize that you were depleting their influence over you to the point where, upon your complete withdrawal, they would be devoid of anything to grasp. In the end, you weren't leaving a feeding ground. You were departing a barren wasteland that you had meticulously cultivated. They are now reduced to feasting on the memory of the person you once were, failing to recognize that this persona no longer exists for them. Thirdly, you exploited their overconfidence to your advantage. Their unwavering certainty that you would never leave inadvertently facilitated your planning. Their arrogance served as your greatest camouflage. They were convinced that they had deciphered you, your routines, boundaries, and limitations. And because of their steadfast belief in your perpetual presence, they became lax in their surveillance. This false sense of security blinded them to the subtle modifications you were implementing right under their noses. You understood how to play into their ego. You allowed them to maintain the illusion of control. You refrained from overtly challenging their dominance. You avoided sudden movements that could arouse suspicion. You behaved as if nothing had altered, all while meticulously noting every vulnerability in their behavior. You identified periods of distraction patterns in their monitoring and assumptions they made about your actions. Each of these blind spots became an unlocked doorway in your escape plan. Individuals of this nature thrive on the notion that their absence would be catastrophic. They believe their presence in your life is immutable, that you could not possibly function without them. You leveraged this belief against them. The more firmly they believed in your unwavering loyalty, the less effort they invested in controlling your every move. This created an ideal environment for clandestine preparation. It was as if they were constructing the walls of their own downfall brick by brick, while you diligently recorded the location of every developing crack. When the moment arrived for your departure, they were caught completely off guard. This explains the intensity of their shock. They perceived you as unwavering in your loyalty, forever bound to your assigned role. However, you had long since ceased to participate in their charade. You had transformed their certainty into a trap of their own making. The beauty of it lies in their current mental replay of events, attempting to pinpoint the moment of transformation. They are unable to isolate a specific event because there was no single defining moment. It was a gradual, methodical process concealed in plain sight. You did not merely escape their control. You dismantled it while they remained convinced of their absolute dominion over you. And now, the realization that they were outmaneuvered gnaws at them more profoundly than your absence ever could. Fourthly, you trained your mind to cease seeking their validation. You cultivated this mental independence long before initiating any physical action. The true battle unfolded within the confines of your mind, where you quietly deposed them from the dominion they believed they held over your thoughts. While they were engrossed in manipulating your actions and reactions, you were diligently breaking their hold over your self-worth and emotional landscape. Initially, these may have been minor acts of resistance, resisting the urge to compulsively check your phone after receiving a message, refraining from endlessly replaying their criticisms, or declining to justify yourself when subjected to unwarranted demands for explanation. These small victories accumulated, ultimately leading you to a state of independence from their approval for your sense of wholeness. You supplanted their voice in your mind with your own one that was louder and clearer. This mental freedom fundamentally altered your trajectory. You ceased seeking their permission, praise, or understanding. Their opinions became mere background noise that you could effortlessly filter out. And once this occurred, the physical departure became inevitable, for they had lost their throne within your mind. When you departed the room, they were not merely losing your physical presence. They were losing the invisible crown they had falsely assumed to wear over your soul. This internal shift distinguishes a planned exit from a desperate flight. You were not fleeing with the expectation of healing later. You healed internally first, transforming your departure into a natural consequence, not a frantic act. They never anticipated this development because you did not broadcast your newfound independence. It blossomed silently, fiercely, and permanently. By the time you vanished, they were not merely missing you. They were missing the control they once wielded, a loss far more unsettling. A mind liberated from the need for their validation is the ultimate power move, rendering your exit not only flawless but also unstoppable. Fifthly, you ceased broadcasting your movements and transformed into a private asset. You recognized that the only way to safeguard your freedom was to cease divulging every detail of your life. They thrived on information, on knowing your every move, feeling, and plan, because this knowledge empowered them to interfere, manipulate, and sabotage your progress. Thus, you ceased providing them with the data they required to control you. There were no more emotional outbursts to provide them with ammunition, no more status updates to reveal your next steps. You became silent on all fronts, not out of weakness, but out of strategic strength. They could perceive your physical presence, but you became a closed book, a sealed vault. They were left staring at a shell, clueless to the inner workings. This transition to stealth was essential. When they are unaware of your endeavors or destination, they are powerless to interfere. They cannot gaslight, guilt trip, or ensnare you in their drama. You effectively severed their surveillance capabilities, forcing them to speculate and scramble while you quietly executed your plans. Functioning as a private asset entails fiercely guarding your energy, time, and emotions. It requires acknowledging that the most significant actions in your life occur behind the curtain, shielded from prying eyes. They forfeited their leverage the moment you ceased broadcasting. Deprived of their accustomed access, their influence crumbled. This is not about engaging in games or concealing yourself out of fear. It's about reclaiming your autonomy by becoming untouchable. You controlled the narrative by refusing to share it. And because you became an enigma rather than an open book, they were unable to reel you back in regardless of their efforts. Sixthly, you allowed them to believe they won arguments to ultimately win the war. You ceased engaging in their petty skirmishes, not because you had lost your passion or voice, but because you recognized that every argument they won was merely a diversion from the true battle you were waging, your freedom. You no longer felt compelled to prove your rightness or justify your feelings. You understood that defending yourself in every minor conflict only provided them with more fuel. more reasons to cling to you or emotionally drag you back. Consequently, you allowed them to have the last word. You allowed them to believe they had prevailed in the argument, that they had broken you down or maintained control. But in reality, every concession and silent moment was an integral part of your strategy to conserve your energy and strength for the actions that genuinely mattered. You weren't losing, you were conserving your resources. This was you playing the long game. You comprehended that winning a trivial argument was meaningless if it cost you your peace or hindered your progress. You chose to disengage from reacting, proving yourself and feeding their need for control. By withdrawing from the noise, you deprived them of satisfaction and denied them the power that stems from perpetual conflict. While they were preoccupied with celebrating victories in these minor battles, you were quietly preparing your departure. You weren't merely enduring their tactics. You were outsmarting them, maintaining your focus on the grand prize, your complete liberation. They may still believe they possess the upper hand because they had the last word, but you were already poised to make the decisive move. You remained calm, patient and steadfast while they depleted their ammunition. And when the moment arrived, you executed your move, securing the victory that truly mattered. Seventhly, you timed your exit to coincide with their moment of distraction. You were too astute to depart when all eyes were fixed upon you. You understood that the moment of greatest peril is when they are fully alert and prepared to react. Therefore, you exercised patience. You waited for their attention to dissipate, for their focus to wander into another person's drama, their own crisis, or the comfortable assumption of your unwavering allegiance. Your exit wasn't impulsive or desperate. It was meticulously timed, akin to a skilled general awaiting the enemy's misdirection before launching the maneuver that alters everything. They were consumed by chasing distractions. Perhaps it was a new conflict, a fresh victim to manipulate, or their own intricate emotions drawing them into turmoil. Whatever the cause, their focus was not on you. They felt secure, convinced of your loyalty and containment, and thus lowered their defenses. This fleeting moment of distraction became your opportune moment. You didn't merely depart physically, you vanished emotionally and mentally long beforehand. As such, your physical disappearance lacked the elements of suspicion. Departing during their period of diminished vigilance meant they lacked any immediate means of intercepting you. They were too scattered to orchestrate a response, too absorbed in their own cacophony to notice your quiet departure. By the time they realized your absence, the window of opportunity to restrain you had already slammed shut. This explains why your exit appears to have transpired in an instant, but was in reality the culmination of protracted and patient preparation. You recognized that any premature move would ignite chaos, so you patiently awaited the opportune conditions. It was not about speed, but about precision. You converted their distractions into your shield and their overconfidence into your camouflage. While they were preoccupied with extraneous matters, you calmly amassed your freedom piece by piece. When you ultimately stepped out, you weren't fleeing from anything. You were transitioning into a new life beyond their reach. And you executed this transition when they were least prepared to fight for you. This is the power of timing, not merely executing your move, but executing it when it matters most, when they are most vulnerable, distracted and convinced of your unwavering presence. You didn't just escape. You executed a flawless vanishing act that left them stunned, powerless, and still struggling to comprehend the unfolding events. Eighthly, you rendered yourself emotionally untraceable. They may have retained your contact information, but by the time of your departure, they were dialing a phantom. Calls were connected, texts accumulated, but none of it resonated because you had achieved emotional untraceability long before your physical exit. This was not about shutting down or adopting an affectation of coldness for the sake of toughness. It was a deliberate, almost surgical detachment. You recognized that as long as they could penetrate your heart, spirit, and vulnerabilities, they retained a tether that could reel you back whenever they tugged. Thus, you wrested this leash from their grasp before departing. You ceased providing them with the emotional cues they relied upon. There were no reactions to their guilt trips, no waves of anger to capture their attention, no tears to fuel their control. You constructed a fortress within yourself where their words bounced off harmlessly, and their manipulations failed to penetrate. This emotional untraceability meant that when your body finally departed the space they occupied, your soul was already leagues away. There was no lingering attachment drawing you back, no tether to yank you into their drama. They may have exhausted every means of reconnection, but it was akin to transmitting messages into an empty void, no reply, no acknowledgement, no engagement. This degree of disconnection rendered your exit not only feasible but also permanent, because they were unable to reach you, unable to break you down, and unable to reel you back in. You became untouchable in the most critical sense, not merely physically absent, but emotionally inaccessible. They forfeited their power the moment you ceased feeding their need to control your emotions, and by the time you physically departed, you were already liberated in a manner they would never comprehend regardless of their pursuit. Ninthly, you meticulously collected the evidence but refrained from revealing the entire file. You did not simply dismiss your experiences or deny the existence of your wounds. Instead, you maintained a detailed mental record, a ledger documenting every act of betrayal, subtle manipulation, and instance of boundary violation. This was not about plotting vengeance or accumulating grudges as trophies. It was about cultivating a compass that guided you away from illusions, away from the allure of rewriting history through rose-tinted lenses. You understood that forgetting the truth or downplaying the damage is what perpetuates cycles of suffering for many. It is easy to romanticize the past, to cling to the hope of change, or to blame yourself for prolonged endurance. But you resolutely resisted this trap. Your memory became your armor, a clear, unfiltered archive that kept you grounded and focused on your liberation. Simultaneously, you never divulged every detail. You refrained from broadcasting the entire file for public consumption. There was no dramatic reveal, no social media diatribe, no public reckoning. You guarded your truth quietly and privately, understanding that exposing everything would only empower them further or ensnare you in their drama. Maintaining this balance demanded discipline, You bore the weight of the truth internally, but you channeled it as fuel for advancement, not as a weapon for inflicting harm or punishment. This enabled you to depart without the emotional turmoil of rehashing old wounds. You were clear-eyed, sober, and steadfast because your mind was anchored in reality, not nostalgia. This archive prevented you from retreating to the past, relinquishing your boundaries, or affording them any opportunity to rewrite the narrative. Your departure encompassed the physical, mental, and emotional realms because you never permitted yourself to forget their true nature. And this unwavering clarity is what rendered your exit permanent and potent. Tenthly, you departed without affording them the closure they desperately sought. You recognized that closure isn't always synonymous with healing. Often it is a trap disguised as a neat resolution. They desired that final conversation, that final opportunity to manipulate your emotions, rewrite the narrative, and reel you back under their control, but you steadfastly refused to grant them the stage for their performance. You understood that by participating in the closure they craved, you would be placing a weapon in their hands disguised as a farewell. Instead of granting them that final word or emotional tug, you decisively shut the door. You denied them the chance to script one more scene in which they played the victim or convinced you to remain entangled in their web. By foregoing the closure conversation, you severed their access to your vulnerabilities and terminated the cycle of reciprocal interaction that sustains toxic relationships. This was not an act of callousness or indifference. It was a calculated decision. You recognize that the concept of closure is frequently employed to perpetuate stagnation, leading individuals to believe that true freedom is contingent upon that elusive final conversation. However, you broke free from this pattern. You prioritized your liberation over their need for control, camouflaged as resolution. By departing without closure, you established a definitive severance. They may be left perplexed, enraged, or desperate, but this confusion is indicative of a power shift. They no longer possess the key to your narrative. You locked the door they presumed to open and departed without a backward glance. This ultimate act of refusal constitutes one of your most impactful maneuvers. It signifies that you are not awaiting permission to be free, nor are you affording them any opportunity to rewrite your ending. You exited on your own terms, unburdened, untouchable, and entirely your own. So to bring it all together, remember this. You have the power to architect your own liberation. It's not about dramatic escapes or sudden upheavals, but about the quiet, consistent dismantling of control, the strategic nurturing of your own inner strength, and the reclaiming of your own narrative. You've got this. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you have any experiences that resonate with this idea of a slow, deliberate escape? What are some of the challenges you've faced in breaking free, and what strategies have worked for you? Leave a comment down below. I'm really interested in hearing your perspective and sparking a discussion. And if this resonated with you, and you're interested in exploring more on topics like personal empowerment and reclaiming your autonomy, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Thanks for being here, and remember, your freedom is worth fighting for.